Today at the Lambeth Conference is a day to ponder and think about mission and evangelism, a day to share stories, to share inspiration, to talk together about how we tell the story of how God has brought us out of darkness and into his marvelous light. It's a day that we start, like every other day, with 2 hours spent in Scripture, spent in the epistle of 1 Peter, and today was Peter 1.
Today we've been thinking about mission and evangelism. Mission is the big picture of everything that God wants to do through God's church for God's world. Evangelism is that bit of mission whereby individual women and men become disciples of Jesus. Making disciples is our core business. And what's a disciple? Well, a disciple is somebody who is joining in with God in God's mission of love to the world. And therefore today we're encouraging the churches across the Anglican Communion, but particularly the bishops of the churches, to be leaders in mission and leaders in evangelism.
So good morning, everyone. I hope you slept well and are excited for a full conference day. This will start a pattern for the conference where the day will begin grounded in Scripture and learning from the teachings of 1 Peter.
So the theme of our day today is mission and evangelism. Can I get a whoop for that? Mission and evangelism. And we'll be exploring this together as part of a global church.
Sisters and brothers, the Church of Jesus Christ makes disciples. That is our core business. That is what we are about. Not just converts. Not just, Jesus doesn't say, go into all the world and make converts. He doesn't say, go into all the world and make churchgoers. He says, make disciples, followers of Jesus.
So we just began our course focusing on mission and evangelism, and there is no better place for us as a church to start with that clear focus of having received such good news from Jesus, that Jesus set us free, and then for us to freely share that, and for that sharing of the gospel to be at the heart of all of our ministries as bishops, as priests, as a whole children of God, to commit again to be people who share that good news. So deeply inspiring and encouraging.
Yeah, mission is the heart of the Christian work and ministry, and we see in our area in the Middle East, in Egypt, North Africa, and the Horn of Africa, how the Lord is blessing the ministry in many ways. In North Africa, we are a missionary diocese, so it speaks to our needs, and it's really what we do in our ministry.
It was good to be reminded what our central calling is, which isn't just to make disciples, but actually to help them walk the journey of discipleship. It's not just about conversion, it's about a life change that we then offer to others. I think Bishop Stephen said that we're not to be the bread makers, but we are to be the beggars who share our bread. How powerful is that, recognizing that we too need to be fed, and then we need to go out and share what we have with those around us as well.
Today has been a day for looking outward, for looking beyond the conference, for sharing stories from outside, from other contexts, learning from one another, and then thinking and reflecting on how that story, how what we've learned, how what we've shared can be taken back out into provinces, into dioceses, and into parishes, so that each and every part of the communion can carry on telling the story of what God has done.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's another lovely afternoon here in East Kent, and you're very welcome this afternoon. It's wonderful. We had a wonderful time together this morning in the cathedral, and it's great that we are back here this afternoon. This afternoon, our topic for the plenary is Safe Church. And it's a great pleasure to lead us through this afternoon, Garth Blake and other members of the Anglican Safe Church Commission. Garth, over to you now.
Welcome to this plenary session presented by the Anglican Communion Safe Church Commission, which will address the topic, how can our churches become spaces where everyone is safe? My name is Garth Blake. I'm from Australia and I'm the chair of the Commission. At the outset, I want to answer two questions. First, what is Safe Church? Safe Church and safeguarding are interchangeable words and refer to creating a culture of safety for everyone in the church by preventing and responding to abuse. Second, why is there a focus on Safe Church? People, especially women and children, in many provinces have experienced abuse perpetrated by some clergy and church workers. They have suffered and continue to suffer harm. This plenary contains material about abuse that you may find disturbing. Members of the safeguarding and chaplaincy teams are available now and throughout the Lambeth Conference, should you wish to have a conversation. I strongly encourage you to make use of these resources rather than trying to deal with your reactions alone. By way of context, what Safe Church or safeguarding initiatives have the instruments of communion recently taken? In 2008 at the Lambeth Conference, the abuse of power within society and the church and its disproportionate impact on women and children was an important theme. In 2012, the Anglican Consultative Council requested all provinces to adopt the Charter for the Safety of People within the churches of the Anglican Communion. This charter has 5 commitments: providing support where there is abuse, implementing effective responses to abuse, adopting and promoting standards for the practice of pastoral ministry, assessing suitability for ministry, and promoting a culture of safety. In 2016, the Anglican Consultative Council requested the establishment of a Safe Church Commission and requested all provinces to implement the protocol for disclosure of ministry suitability information between the churches of the Anglican Communion. This protocol establishes a system for the provision of information about alleged and proven criminal conduct and sexual misconduct of clergy and lay leaders who move between or within provinces. In 2019, the Anglican Consultative Council approved guidelines developed by the Safe Church Commission and requested each province to adopt the Charter and to implement the protocol and the guidelines. I will now introduce you to the guidelines. You will see that they have the following structure: an introduction which contains information about their purpose, theological foundations, format and presentation, and implementation. 5 sections which contain background information and specific guidelines for implementing the 5 commitments of the Charter, and 3 schedules: a dictionary of terms, the Charter, and the protocol. The key word in the guidelines is abuse. which can include bullying, concealment of abuse, cyber abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, gender-based violence, harassment, neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and spiritual abuse. Each of these types of abuse is defined in the guidelines. Abuse often occurs and continues because of the unequal power relationship between the abuser and their victim. In the church, other forms of abuse can be accompanied by spiritual abuse, such as when an abuser silences their victim by threatening punishment by God or exclusion from the church if the abuse is disclosed. I want to give you a brief description of the 5 sections of the guidelines. Section 1 deals with providing support where there is abuse. The background information discusses the nature of abuse, the harmful effects of abuse, care for victims of abuse, forgiveness, and support for those providing care to victims of abuse. The specific guidelines explain how to establish systems for offering care to victims of abuse and support for those providing care to victims of abuse. There will be both primary and secondary victims where abuse occurs. Secondary victims include family members of the primary victim or the abuser, other church workers, and members of the church. The harmful effects of abuse are commonly not understood. Victims may experience harmful emotional and psychological effects, harmful effects on their relationships with others, and spiritual difficulties. Section 2 deals with implementing effective responses to abuse. The background information discusses misuse of power and authority by those who abuse, concealment of abuse in the church, procedures to determine the truth of complaints, outcomes of complaints, and support for church communities affected by complaints. The specific guidelines explain how to establish systems for fairly dealing with complaints, support for complainants and respondents, and support for affected parishes and church organisations. All church workers have power and authority by virtue of their role and are in a position of trust. Abusers have commonly betrayed this trust by misusing their power to groom their victim and others close to the victim. Some church leaders have covered up allegations of abuse by ignoring complaints or minimising their seriousness, or by moving the alleged abuser to another position. These actions have further harmed victims and damaged the reputation of the church when the concealment has been publicly exposed. Section 3 deals with adopting and promoting standards for the practice of ministry. The background information discusses ministry in the church, the imbalance of power in ministry relationships, standards for the practice of ministry in a code of conduct, and the importance of ministry support for church workers. The specific guidelines indicate the areas to be addressed by a code of conduct and explain the naturing of training for the code and for ministry support. The experience of several provinces has shown that the scriptures and the ordinal have been insufficient to ensure ethical behaviour by clergy. those provinces have responded by developing a code of conduct with clear standards for the practice of ministry. Section 4 deals with assessing suitability for ministry. The background information discusses the occurrence of abuse where there has been no background checking, the importance of background checking, and the circumstances in which a risk assessment is required. The specific guidelines explain how to establish systems for the assessment of the suitability of persons to be church workers and the disclosure of ministry suitability information. Some church workers with a prior history of abusing others have been appointed to positions or ordained without background checking and have subsequently committed abuse in their ministry. Background checking is an essential means to prevent abuse in the church, as past conduct is an important indicator of present and future behaviour. Section 5 deals with promoting a culture of safety. The background information discusses how the culture of the church has contributed to abuse, how ineffective governance in the church has contributed to abuse, the challenge of known and suspected abusers in the church, and creating and maintaining a culture of safety in the church. The specific guidelines explain how to establish systems for the formation and ongoing development of clergy, educating parishes and church organisations, ministry to those known or suspected of perpetrating abuse, monitoring compliance with safe church rules and policies, and the review of safe church rules and policies. I hope that each of you will read the guidelines carefully. They have been translated into French, Korean, Portuguese and Spanish and can be accessed by the QR card on the card that will be placed on your table in the following Lambeth call session. Creating and maintaining a culture of safety in your province requires more than the adoption of the guidelines. They will need to be effectively implemented and undergirded by a theology of safe church or safeguarding which prioritises the safety of all those who participate in the life of the church. They are intended to be adapted to fit the context of your province and may be implemented in stages. I encourage your province to establish a group consisting of those with skills in theology, canon law, training, pastoral care and administration to assist in the implementation of the guidelines. I'll now hand you over to Mandy Marshall.
Thank you, Garth. We are speaking about safe church and safeguarding issues because people have been abused and harmed in our churches. It is important, and we need to hear from the survivors of abuse, from what they have suffered, the pain, the hurt, and the lifelong consequences of the abuse that they have experienced. The short film that you are about to see is a lived reality of a survivor of abuse. It is plain speaking and confronting. We are very grateful for Dr. Anne-Marie Wilson for her willingness to share her story. She is able to do so, but many survivors cannot. You will hear her talk about multiple abusers and being abused multiple times, And this is not unusual for survivors to experience. We recognise that this film may be hard to watch, so we want to reiterate that there is a safeguarding team and the chaplaincy team here available to you if you want to have support and want to speak to them or get help of any kind if you're affected by the film that you're about to watch. Our prayer, my prayer, is that all of you will open your ears to listen, your heart to feel what Dr. Anne-Marie has gone through, and be motivated to take action to keep everyone safe in your churches. Thank you.
So my name's Dr. Anne-Marie Wilson, and I'm the founder and executive director of a charity called 28 Too Many, which is committed to ending female genital mutilation through research, information, data and advocacy. And I set that up in 2010 as a result of meeting FGM in Sudan. In West Darfur, I met a little girl and was actually heard from God directly to set this up, and I'm under the Church Mission Society. I think I'm just committed to helping abuse being stamped out in the church, really. It has made massive impact on my life, quite beyond explanation, really. And I just feel if I can tell my story, brave as it is, brings some levels of shame and guilt still. However, if I can tell my story and others can be impacted, it might actually put a bit of colour on the policies and procedures that we all aim to adhere to. I suppose my story of abuse goes back to when I was a small girl of 7. I went to a convent school and the priest groomed me and abused me on at least 2 occasions, the second quite profoundly. And I did report it to my mum, but never heard anything afterwards as to what particularly happened. I just knew that the priest was sent away. But that incident actually was like a sort of sliver of metal that went into me, like a wound that stayed in me for life. I met a boyfriend in my late teens because I was working in London. I'd left school at 16, bright girl, but life had taken a different slant, really, because of this abuse, and it just made an impact on my life, really, and my fulfilment of all the expectations that would normally have gone ahead. I went to work in a bank, and actually from that time on, this first boyfriend I met was Jewish, and I aligned with a different faith, almost feeling that on some simple level that perhaps a different God, a different angle would make a difference, really. So I eventually, I couldn't marry him because I was Christian, but I met another Jewish man shortly afterwards and did get married, and actually decided to change faith to Judaism simply because then we could have a strand of God in common in our marriage. It was an abusive marriage. I was domestically abused for the whole of that 10 years. And then after my mum died, I had a breakdown. I thought my life wasn't worth living because I'd been abused, and I felt I'd lost my parents to look after me. Hadn't really got any safety inside me. Well, I think my life just went off on a bit of a chaotic path. It didn't seem to matter what happened to me. I'd been sexually abused by a boss at work.
Well, it's classic that it's like every wedding, something's bound to go wrong at some point, isn't it? So whilst we give the tech team a chance to catch up, we'll move on to the next section, and we will play the film of Dr. Anne-Marie Wilson when we can get it back up and running.
So, what issues, safe church issues, are bishops currently dealing with? Members of the Commission, which will come up on the stage here, we're going to give you the briefest snapshot of the picture in our own provinces. Firstly, Australia. From 2013 to 2017, a national and very public government inquiry examined child sexual abuse in institutions, abuse by Anglican clergy and church workers, and systemic failures of Anglican church leaders to respond to disclosures of abuse were exposed. This has resulted in a significant erosion of public trust in churches, including the Anglican Church. Since 2004, there has been a national approach within the Anglican Church to child protection and professional standards for clergy and lay church workers, with ongoing significant reforms, especially in response to the national government inquiry.
In Brazil, as in many countries in Latin America, we are challenged by a context of violence and human rights denial. Police violence, racism, and domestic abuse are an everyday reality, and once again, hunger haunts the most impoverished families. Most people that seek for our church in Brazil, they believe it to be a safe haven from a dangerous world. It makes us even more responsible for the safeguarding of our church, because when there is abuse, the betrayal of trust is even deeper. Through the last 3 years, we have been working on a culture of a safe church in hope to raise greater awareness of abusive behavior and implement deep-rooted policies.
Sisters and brothers, I greet you well this afternoon. My name is Cleophas Lunga, and I am the Bishop of Matabeleland in Zimbabwe and the province of Central Africa. Abuse is a reality in our part of the world. Abuse happens, but there is a culture of silence, a culture that might be linked to family or community networks because of the interdependency way of our lives. But the culture of silence leads to a lack of awareness and action about the negative impact of abuse. Despite the pastoral care systems, the culture of silence affects adequate systems of receiving and responding. And so, the good news in our part of the world as a province is that we are now ready to adapt the guidelines to fit our context as a province. I thank you.
In the past, abuse must have happened, both in the church and outside the church, and in people's homes. However, culturally, it's one of the topics that people would rather not talk about and try to hide, trying to save their family honor. During those times, if the church heard about an abuse or something was reported, then the church would have dealt with it on a case-by-case basis. Now, in the province of Jerusalem and the Middle East, the church is working hard to change that culture, to open it up, so that we can get to people and make sure that they are all safe. And we are also working hard on, we have started the work and we continue to work on creating guidelines, codes of conduct, and running training for clergy and churchgoers in the hope that we can safeguard all of God's people. Also, the province works hard on helping victims of modern-day slavery, which is present in some parts of the province.
The Scottish Episcopal Church adopted a centralised approach to safeguarding over 20 years ago. And so as a safeguarding officer, I work with all 7 of our dioceses. Back in 1998, our policy focused on protecting children. But since then, we've come to a much wider understanding of human vulnerability, recognising that anyone can be vulnerable, the many different ways in which people can abuse others, and how we should respond to abuse. I would never claim that we've always got it right when responding to abuse. But rather, I think Safe Church, we recognise that being a safe church will always be a work in progress, teaching each new generation of church members how to be a safe church, learning from our experiences, refining our structures and processes for dealing with abuse as and when it occurs. In other words, there'll always be room for improvement.
My name's Andrew Koo, and I'm the Chancellor of the Diocese in West Malaysia. And Malaysia is one of the countries in the province of Southeast Asia. And while there are no known reported cases of abuse in the countries, in the Anglican Church in Southeast Asia, it cannot be denied that sexual abuse is happening in the church. It is a reality. There are documented cases, there are prosecutions, and there are criminal convictions. It may be that victims don't disclose their abuse because it is related with family, relationships with others, and it also affects the image of the church. So they may be discouraged from disclosing them. And sometimes victims are actively discouraged by church authorities from reporting. However, those days may be ending soon because more and more countries in Southeast Asia are passing laws that have introduced mandatory reporting of allegations of sexual abuse, and there are criminal penalties for failing to do so.
Greetings. In the Episcopal Church, there were lots of efforts, informal efforts, to start to address situations of abuse. And those efforts really came into being and got systemically organized in the mid-1990s. That's when the Episcopal Church began conducting background checks and also instituting training programs to change behavior of people, to help people identify warning signs of abuse as well as how to respond. And we're still learning. Even though for 30 years we've been at this work, we are still learning. Just recently in 2018, new updated policies for the General Episcopal Church were rolled out. And currently there's new training materials right now being developed and released. And with all of that going on, there are still situations of abuse by clergy, church workers, and lay leaders. Bishops in the Episcopal Church continue to respond to current misconduct, abuse when it occurs, as well as trying to help congregations heal from abuse that may have occurred decades ago. What we've learned is that when there's abuse, failing to respond or responding poorly causes more harm. Responding well is really important. And an interesting thing about the Episcopal Church that's different than some other provinces is that our ecclesiastical clergy, a disciplinary process, applies only to ordained leaders, deacons, priests, and bishops. Our ecclesiastical discipline does not apply to lay church workers or lay leaders.
My name is Bishop Festus Yeboah Asumah. Anglican Diocese of Sunyani in Ghana, in the Church of the Province of West Africa. And I'm speaking for the part of West Africa as well as other part of Africa. And we realize that roughly half of Africa population is under the age of 18. Many of African children are at risk because of violence, abuse, and diseases, of which also occur in the church. For effective safeguarding in Africa, we must include the following qualities: patience, compassion, respect, and empathy for people and their struggles. There also should be the need or willingness to do more, far more listening than just advice given. We also need to be sensitive to the cultural and ethical issues that are related when we come to communication. Thank you.
The province of the West Indies is not immune to incidents of abuse within the church by clergy and church workers. These occur in many and varied forms, ranging from disrespect to abuse resulting in physical or mental pain. Previously, not much attention was paid to safeguarding issues. There were incidents of abuse, and some were inappropriately dealt with. Safeguarding, however, is now on the agenda of the House of Bishops and the province. Different dioceses are at various stages in addressing the problem. There's a code of ethics in 2 dioceses. There's also cultural hesitation in reporting cases of abuse in some dioceses. Greater awareness needs to be created to stem incidents of abuse within the church.
Thank you. And now we're going to try again and listen to the story of Dr. Anne-Marie Wilson. If this doesn't work this time, we'll arrange for the film to be distributed or put on the website so that you can watch later, and also the transcript to be communicated out. The transcript should be available in French, Spanish, and Portuguese too. So let's see if it works, but if not, we will circulate it. Thank you.
Well, I think my life just went off on a bit of a chaotic path. It didn't seem to matter what happened to me. I'd been sexually abused by a boss at work. Later, 2 men raped me while I was in hospital, trying to deal with my breakdown following my parents' deaths. I also sadly experienced spiritual abuse in an Anglican context. It just felt like I was a magnet for more and more and more abuse, whatever I did, wherever I went. I unconsciously knew about all this abuse, but couldn't deal with it. And it actually wasn't till I was 30 that I even confided in anybody at the hospital to say I'd been abused as a 7-year-old, 8-year-old at school. I decided in my early 40s to go and try and find out what had happened, and took a friend as a chaperone with me, went to see the headmistress, who was still alive there at the convent. And she said, "Oh yes, I know why you've come to see me," even though she had no idea why I'd come to see her. And I hadn't seen her for, over 30 years. And she said, "Your mother rang me when this happened, and I wrote to the priest, and he went away." And I remember her saying this line, he had a long time to contemplate the error of his ways. She said he lived in a silent order, and he would have, and she said that was implying that nothing ever happened after that. I talked to the Anglican Church in the diocese in London, talked to the safeguarding officer, and she helped me to speak a little bit and get some help. And I made contact to the safeguarding officer for the order of where this priest was, and subsequently with the convent again. I did it through safeguarding officers, 2 safeguarding officers, and also then learnt from her that actually the church hadn't been correct, the convent hadn't been correct, the priest hadn't been sent away. He'd gone off for 4 years as an independent study project to Canada, so would have almost been rebranded and allowed to groom and interfere with other girls there. The impact on my life is that I put all my energies into successful achievement. It's almost like if I become a really good girl, if I please my parents, my class, my teachers, people in authority, God, then I will be accepted. But of course, I still felt like a little girl who had a dirtiness inside her, who was spoilt. And once I was spoilt, it didn't really matter what happened to me. And I think it's almost like it was hologrammed across my head. People who are damaged, who look for victims to abuse, look for that in a personality as well. So I think workaholism is probably one, perfectionism. I think I stopped eating in my adolescence because I didn't want to hit puberty and have my body develop. It was nothing to do with body image. It was just because I didn't want the male attention that came with being, you know, a young girl coming into puberty. I'd already had so much problems. I couldn't actually handle male relationships. Whatever men wanted, I ended up feeling I had to say yes to because of what had happened to me as a small child. But I think with my depression, my PTSD, it's highly likely the cancer as well. And all those other things have all directly come from the abuse I suffered as a 7-year-old. And that will shorten my life and has also made impact on what I've done with my life, the relationships I've got in my life. And it's taken me probably over 50 years to heal the traumas therapeutically, and it's taken me probably nearly 30 years of therapy in some shape or form to sort out my identity post these things happening to me. I think spiritual leaders, vicars, clergy, priests, getting involved with saying that you should forgive your abuser, it can do more damage. I think that it's completely wrong to say that. And I think it shows a lack of compassion, empathy, and understanding of walking in someone else's shoes. I think forgiveness is between an individual and God, and I think it's a private matter. I think if the person wants to have someone else witness that and say some prayers out loud, or some healing, or some a short course or a process and telling their story and coming to a point, then that's a whole different league. But I think I vehemently stand against the church saying people should forgive their abusers. Actually, there's another whole place where abuse needs to be dealt with by the church. That's the church's business, and it's God's business to deal with the individual's forgiveness, as in the survivor's forgiveness. As a survivor myself, to other survivors of abuse, any form, spiritual, mental, emotional, or physical, I would say, firstly, get some help. Secondly, tell somebody. It should never be kept a secret. I was made to keep all sorts of secrets, but it's not right. And as an adult now, I know that's not right, and I wouldn't adhere to that now. I would also say join other people on forums and find a forum for you. For me, it was the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse was mine, but also it was getting some mental health support as well in an era when mental health wasn't known about as well and wasn't supported. I think if I was to be talking to senior leaders, bishops, archdeacons, priests, vicars, I would be saying it is your business to deal with abuse in the church. It is your business to clear out the skeletons of the past. It is your business to listen to survivors. It is your business to believe them and give them the support, whether that's therapy or counselling, to not treat them as victims, to deal with the perpetrator, possibly suspend them or have them on a break, to not move them around to other places, to let them re-perpetrate elsewhere, to think about the support that I would like. I think for the church, it needs to have some safe spaces for people. I think for almost like you would have in police stations, you have special officers who deal with rape or sexual violence and a special suite to look after them. I think safe spaces for people to go to when they've been abused. They can talk with counselling support, with therapy, not short term but long term, to help them signpost through their life, for keeping in their job, for accessing support, finding other groups. I'm quite a functional person, so I've managed to signpost myself and I signpost other people. But for people that don't have that, maybe a booklet, maybe resources, maybe stuff on a website that people can access, different languages, so that there is really clear evidence that the church is serious about safeguarding, not just passing policies that just play lip service to it. I think as a woman who has worked in Africa and Asia and most continents in the world, over 60 countries I've worked in, I would like to say to bishops and archbishops that for the church to access the next generation, it needs to clear up its past. It needs to be a safe place for any minority group, and to come out and say in clear statements, we are sorry for the sins of our previous generations and we are not going to tolerate this anymore, and we have put these protections in for people. And I would like to say to all the people watching this that you need to put safeguardings in so that there is always a higher authority that people can go to, even if that includes jumping above a level to the bishop, and that people will always listen. I would like to see the church of the future have no place for abuse, and that nobody will suffer like I've suffered, and that my story today will have been listened to and taken to heart and acted upon, and behaviours, attitudes will change directly as a result of you watching this today.
There's an important message to say here, and that obviously Dr. Anne-Marie Wilson lives in a Western country with access to a lot of Western resources that many of you will not have access to. And many of you live in situations of war and where rape is very dominant and prevalent. This survivor video was one that we wanted to share because it's speaking directly from a survivor's voice. And we know that survivors' voices will be different in the different contexts and the different places that we have. And it may not link to some of you because it's so far remote, and it looks like a Western woman in London with lots of resources available to her to get help and support. What we want to do is to say that actually, when survivors come forward, is to believe them. Is to believe them and give them the help that you're able to do so within your churches and in your diocese as to whatever is available. You won't necessarily have therapeutic support, etc. But we can all believe a survivor and stand with a survivor. Okay, what we want to move on to next is I just want to hear from Archbishop Justin and Archbishop Thabo, who had to deal with situations in the Church of England and in South Africa themselves. So please welcome to the stage Archbishop Justin and Archbishop Thabo. Thank you. So as we just said, we recognise that that situation is very different in very different contexts, and we recognise that that story is very Western. But over the last few years, we've had to deal with safeguarding issues, both in the Church of England and in the Anglican Province of Southern Africa, which has focused on the intense failure, in essence, of our churches to put in place safeguarding practices within our provinces. And I just want to ask you both, how has that affected you personally?
For myself, when I became Archbishop almost 10 years ago, I knew some of the problems that we would face. What I did not know was the problem of safe church, of safeguarding. And it's had a huge effect on me. It has been the biggest, most painful burden of this role that I've faced over the last 10 years. There have been lots of reasons for that, but first of all, I had to lose all my assumptions. This is safeguarding, safe church is nothing to do with human sexuality. The biggest scandal I've been dealing with has been from a married conservative evangelical. It affects every part of the church, evangelical through to liberal, low church to high church. It is largely a problem of men in the vast majority. And the biggest challenge of it has been to try and get the institution of the church to be serious about it and never to cover up in any way at all. Because we are so, all of us, wherever we are, there's either huge other issues. I mean, I imagine in DRC or South Sudan or countries where there's persecution, there is so much harm going on. But its fundamental issue of safe church is the misuse of power. It's not even normally particularly about sex. It's about power. The ability of someone to do what they like with someone who is weaker. So bullying, having sex when they want it, and when the person tells someone, the church says, oh, we can't let that be known, or, oh, a bishop would never do that. Well, we've discovered that's not true. So I know that the experience of these years for me has been agonizingly painful. And what I say to you is over forever, but certainly over the last 40 or 50 years, we covered up what went wrong until about the mid-1990s, early 2000s. And it has terribly damaged the church. And what I would say to all of you, whatever circumstances we are in, is the words of 1 John 1:9. If we say we have no sin, we lie, and the truth is not in us. That, for me, is the importance. I suppose I'd quibble disagree very slightly with Mandy. When someone says they've been abused to me now, and the priest or church leader says, no, I didn't, I don't necessarily believe, but I always take them very seriously indeed. That's the difference, I would say. 9 in 10 cases, 99 in 100, the victim is telling the truth. 99 in 100. 1 in 100, perhaps not. But we always say, I remember someone telling me a few months back, and they hinted, and then they told me about an abuse by a priest. And we sat down where people could see me, not going into a closed office, and I said, I will make one promise to you, that I will follow this up every week, and that I take you totally seriously. And that is what we did. Actually, it's more than a few months now. COVID makes you forget the time. And the result was that the person who had abused was removed from their role. And it was overseas somewhere. So that's my lesson. Transparency, walk in the light.
Archbishop Thabo, so again, you've had to deal with some serious allegations in your province. How has this affected you?
Thank you very much, Mandy. You know, watching the video was quite moving, and I want to start first by saying sorry for the sins of our former priests, former generations that have scarred so many people and have actually undermined the faith. And when I have dealt with the cases that have come to me, they have been very time-consuming, very stressful, very tiring, and the victims that came forward were pained, they were angry at the church, angry at the church leaders, they were distrustful of our processes, and on a couple of occasions there were public attacks, and we as bishops are used to dealing with matters in a pastoral manner, but when it becomes canonical, we have to bite our tongue and learn to be patient, and sometimes that could be very difficult. So I will say, at a personal level, it was really scarring. There were not too many, but just a few that came. You feel like your world is collapsing because you want a particular image of the church, and you become disappointed that it is happening in the church.
I quite agree with all of that. That's exactly right. It's an awful feeling. And the worst thing we can do to people is for the church not to take them seriously when they report abuse, because then we re-abuse them. And the damage done by that is to drive them away from the Lord. To drive them away from church, from trust, and from hope.
Thank you for sharing that. It's quite hard to share those painful thoughts. What would you say to your fellow colleagues here in terms of safe church and safeguarding and putting that into practice within their churches?
I carry a little card in my wallet that tells me 4 basic things to do on a little card, business card sort of size. I would say keep it very simple, but make sure that every person, every clergy person, and especially every bishop, knows who they can call to report something that goes wrong. The worst part for us was a public inquiry called the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse, which looked at a number of churches and looked at the Church of England. And they said to us, you're marking your own homework. And we were. When I gave evidence, at the end of it, I broke down in tears when they asked me what I felt, because I was so ashamed of the church on television. And I would say to people, just say to clergy, however few the resources, always take people seriously, always report it, and never try and deal with it yourself, because it needs someone independent, and people learn to be terrified of the church and of clergy, because that's where it's gone wrong. And also of other authorities. I noticed there was a comment about going to the police. I too often around the world find people who've gone to the police and been raped again.
Yeah, I mean, this is a Western concept, and it needs to be contextualised, and like you say,
contextualised. Who do you know in your diocese who is just a holy person? They're a good person to help.
Exactly, yeah.
In our province, the Safe and Inclusive Church, as a matter of course, takes the side of the complainant to begin with. But I will say to my colleagues, don't try and do it yourself. Find church lawyers, theologians, pastoral counselors to help you establish your own safe church. It is quite daunting. I mean, safe church in our province is independent, and we are used to saying the bishop is the focus of unity, and we can read the canons, but now they have taken the lead. And initially, it was like losing power, but when you realize the importance of their work, we are really celebrating their work. So I'll encourage my colleagues, please, we don't know everything. Let's get a specialist to do this very traumatic, painful aspect of when the church has wronged God's people.
Thank you so much. And remember that the Safe Church guidelines are there to help you to implement them, and they've been created by people from across the Anglican Communion to help and support you to do that effectively within your province. So do come and see us during this week. Thank you so much, Archbishop Justin. Thank you so much, Archbishop Thabo, for sharing so personally and effectively. Thank you. So busy interviewing the archbishops, I forgot my next bit. We're now going to look at Jesus as a compassionate leader. And we're going to be doing that by reflecting on the story of the encounter that Jesus had with the woman that was bleeding for 12 years. And I invite Bishop Festus to come and read us the passage. Thank you.
The passage is from Mark's Gospel, chapter 5, reading from verse 21 to 34. And when Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd followed around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman who was there, who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, she had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet, instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." Beloved, the word of the Lord.
Thank you, Bishop Festus, and greetings to you all. I'm Kim Barker, and I'm from South Africa. These stories that we've been hearing, the work that we've been hearing about, it's difficult to hear about. It's heavy to hold, and it's painful work to do. And as people of faith, we turn to one of the resources that we have, which is Scripture, as a resource to equip us and to strengthen us as we do the work. And so I want to reflect for a few moments on this passage, which is not without its own complexities and power dynamics. But I do believe it has much to offer us as we think about our responses to those who disclose abuse within the context of the church. The story unfolds as Jesus is hurrying along with Jairus to his daughter who is very ill. Jairus has begged Jesus to come and heal his daughter. The crowd surrounds him and they are moving, but Jesus suddenly stops and searches the faces of the people pressing up against him. A hush descends, and Jesus speaks with authority and compassion. "Who touched my clothes?" The disciples find the question very strange. Any number of people have touched Jesus in just the last minute. What can he mean? But there is one woman who knows exactly what he means. The woman has been bleeding for 12 years. Apart from the physical suffering and inconvenience of the illness, this is not the worst of her story. Due to her condition, she has been considered ritually unclean and would have been excluded from her place of worship and from her community. The woman has also been exploited and abused. We hear that she's been to doctor after doctor. They've taken her money, but she still has no cure. In fact, she's getting worse. This is a woman
who has reached the end of her own resources. But the woman knows what Jesus means when he asked who touched him. She had gathered her remaining strength and courage to force her way through the crowds just to get close enough to Jesus to touch his cloak in the desperate hope that she would be healed. And she was. As incredible as it seems, she knows that her body was fully restored in the moment that her fingers touched the cloth. But now she is afraid. She knows that she has challenged taboos and her touch has made Jesus unclean, and she expects condemnation. She considers slipping away into the crowd. But perhaps something in the gentleness of his voice, the softness of his gaze, the faint smile playing at his lips, gives her the courage she needs to stay, and she cowers in front of him, hiding her face. The crowd is now silent, mesmerized by what is unfolding in front of them. How will Jesus deal with this nobody, this outcast, this woman? But there is no rebuke and no harsh words. Perhaps Jesus reaches down and takes the woman's hand, raising her to her feet. Perhaps he asks again, gazing into her eyes with love and delight, "Who is it that touched my clothes?" And perhaps she gives her name. Can you just imagine that moment of being seen with love? At his encouragement, she tells him her whole story, not just about her physical affliction, but what has been done to her, how she has responded, the whole awful truth. And Jesus listens. In the presence of the community which would have marginalized her, he listens. And in his listening presence, Jesus restores far more than her body. He restores her dignity and her place in society and removes her shame. And without saying a word, he exposes the injustices of those who listen with him. And then Jesus speaks. He calls the woman daughter, a term of intimacy and kinship that tells her she belongs and she is beloved. He affirms her faith, a faith that has endured despite being excluded from the faith community for more than a decade. He speaks words of blessing and vocation. Go in peace, and restores her to wholeness in every aspect of her life. Be freed from your suffering. One of the things that strikes me again and again about the story is that Jesus didn't need to stop. The woman's body was healed when she touched his cloak. But Jesus knew that the need for healing was much deeper and much broader than the woman's body or even her as an individual. It needed to include the community that surrounded her as well. As we step back from the immediacy of the story, I'm going to move across to where our bishops of the church are. We can sit here. Yeah. These are our bishops who are on our Safe Church Commission. And I want to ask them, as bishops working at the coalface, what does this encounter, Jesus' encounter with this woman, offer us as we think about responding to victims who disclose abuse within the context of the church?
Thank you very much, Kim, for your question. As church leaders, we experience on the daily what it means to be busy. Bishops' minds are always occupied. If a bishop is not in a meeting, a bishop is attending an event, and funerals and of prominent people and wedding receptions are quite important. But there are also conversations that we progress along the cloisters and corridors, and as we walk up the steps to our offices, and people want to ask questions. And sometimes we are able to give them our time. We stop and listen. But I believe that people, as leaders, we sometimes get so much engrossed in the events, the happenings, and then fail to stop in a similar way as our Lord Jesus Christ did, to stop, to listen. And if we are to stop and listen to the voices of our brothers and sisters who are hurting because they've been abused, and that's not an experience that we can, as a church, simply brush aside. But this is a matter that, as leaders, we really need to attend to it. So our stop actually means a start for someone who is basically looking for hope for restoration. And so if we are to stop to listen to them, we're actually giving them an opportunity to start. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bishop. Good afternoon. I'm Faull and part of the safeguarding leadership team in the Church of England, and therefore part of the Commission. I'd like to talk just a little about power and how we as bishops can use our power to enable those who are marginal and marginalized to come into the center of our life. The woman in this story was in a place of dishonor and even degradation. And by Jesus' relationship with her, was moved into a place of honor. But we know that she had been seeking healing for 12 years. And what I know is two things working in the area of safeguarding. One is how often people have tried to tell their story over the years but have not been attended to. And secondly, because they have tried to tell us their stories, they have often been marginalized. So that work of bringing those who are marginal, who have such an important story to tell us, into the center is vital. So this woman told her story, which was such a challenge to the medical as well as the religious establishment of her day. We need to hear those voices of challenge. But this story, I believe, doesn't tell a tidy story, although it's contained tidily in the Gospel of Mark within the bigger story of the healing of Jairus' daughter. We know that the interventions by Jesus that upset the carefully constructed human balances of power was such a disruption that he was regarded increasingly as a person of trouble. And I wonder about the woman. We don't know her whole story. We don't even know her name. And I wonder whether, having been healed, what agency she had in her community. And what I know from the years of working with those who have stories of abuse to tell is how troubling that is for our whole community. So there isn't a tidy ending, a magic way in which we can bring order into a disordered situation. In one sense, all of us are disempowered by the experience of safeguarding of those who have been abused. And I believe we will need a generation or more of listening to these troubling stories and of all of us having our sense of disempowerment before there is the possibility of the healing of our whole church community.
Thank you, Bishop Brian.
I'm Bishop Brian Marajh. I'm from the province of Southern Africa,
and the Bishop of the Diocese of Kimberley and Kuruman, and I'm the liaison bishop for Safe and Inclusive Church in our province. Thank you for each of you for sharing the richness of this passage, Kim and Cleophas and Viv, and Bishop for Festus for reading it so well so that we could capture the different nuances. Now, my colleagues have focused on the healing of the woman who was suffering of hemorrhage, and Viv has also pointed out the daughter of Jairus. I think that this passage, if we look at the role of Jesus in the passage, and Jesus paused and he was aware of what was happening around him. And I think that this is one of the important things in our busy lives as bishops, that we need to have times where we pause so that we can become aware of what's going on around us. So awareness is important, but not just awareness of what's going on around us, but also self-awareness of how, as the archbishops have shared, how this affects us, but also how we respond or how we do not respond to situations of abuse. And so in our pausing, what needs to happen is a filtering out of our biases and our preferences, so that we can wholly be present for those who are experiencing abuse. And so the other aspect that I just want to emphasize is that all of us are affected. It's not only those who are abused. All of us are affected, and as pointed out, it makes us powerless. It paralyzes us. But by the grace of God, Jesus shows us the way, and the way is to wholeness. And so perhaps that's where we need to pause in this work, to grow into wholeness.
Thank you to each of you for your reflections, and as stories do, I hope that and pray that the story lives with you and invites your own reflections. Thank you.
Just in concluding this session, can I just emphasise that the members of the Commission are keen to talk to you if you would like to engage with us about challenges in your particular province and how to go about implementing the guidelines. You'll see us wearing this badge, and also the blue label Safe Church will be around for the whole of the conference. On your desks after afternoon tea, you will find this little badge, and we invite you to take that badge and wear it throughout this conference as a sign of your commitment to Safe Church. The vision of the Safe Church Commission is that the churches throughout the community will be places of enhanced safety for everyone, where church workers act with integrity, victims of abuse receive care and a just outcome, church workers who commit abuse are held accountable, and church leaders do not conceal abuse. Is this your vision too? And will you help to make this vision a reality by adopting the Lambeth Call on Safe Church, which will be before you after afternoon tea. We thank you for your attendance at this plenary.
Safe Church Commission, thank you very much for your presentation. So much to think about. Just a reminder on what is happening next. Bishops, you'll be back here for 4:30 for your next session. Refreshments are outside of this venue, and spouses, there will also be refreshments in the venues that you are going.
So we've slipped the time somewhat. So bishops, you'll need to be back here for 4:30. Spouses, today, while the bishops are in their call sessions, you have an opportunity to attend strengthening sessions. And those will begin from 4:15, so that's not quite so long to go, but the refreshments will be there, spouses. This afternoon, spouses, there are sessions in each of the 3 streams, offered in a number of languages. There's the personal wholeness stream. Might be a slide about this. No, and the leadership stream and the community action stream. So all those are taking place in the venues. People who have tickets for those sessions will be given priority. And a reminder to spouses that tickets for further sessions are available from the spouses marquee, which is open between 11 in the morning and 5:30, and then from 8 till 9:30 p.m. These sessions this afternoon, spouses sessions are also delayed to 4:30. Thank you. The sessions are facilitated by spouses for spouses with support from facilitators. Spouses, if you are going to one of the sessions that is in Darwin College, there will be a minibus outside for you to take you to that venue. Catherine, back to you.
Just a reminder that there is a reception, another reception at the Old Palace. Please check the back of your badge. You should know the date. For those who are going, the departure is 6:30 outside of Venue 1. And also those who have signed up for the evening pilgrimage, buses are departing at 8 o'clock. If you want to sign up to go on one of these pilgrimages, please go and register at the Simpson building. There are also other various programs in the evening for those who are staying here. The King's Chamber Orchestra are performing in Collier Ferguson Concert Hall in Gulbenkian, starting at 8:30. Anyone is welcome. There is also a bar, Hoodies or K-Bar, if you fancy a drink and a chat. That's all from us this afternoon. Otherwise, enjoy some fresh air and your coffees. Thank you.